Welcome, I'm Paul, this is Dave. Today I have 13 glitch in the matrix and supernatural stories for you. For the first story, we find out even burgers can play with fate. Case file number 2354, written by B. Curtins. The Whataburger Intervention. So, for important context, I live over 300 miles from where I grew up. I was sitting at my computer one night, like 10 p.m., and I just had this massive urge to get up and go somewhere. So I put on shoes and jumped in my truck. Then it was that feeling, turn here, go there, pull into this parking lot. I just kind of followed it. I had arrived at Whataburger. There are 3 in my town, and this one is the furthest from my apartment. I drove probably 10 miles to reach this one, but had one 1.5 miles from my apartment. But food sounded good, so I figured it was just my gut deciding for me. I walk in, and there's a guy stumbling around incoherent, bothering customers and being a nuisance, and generally seeming drunk off his butt. He turns to me though, and I get a look at him. I had several classes with him in high school. He was diabetic as hell, and let his sugar levels get all screwed up, to the point of not being able to function. A similar incident happened in school with him once. So as soon as I recognized him, and saw him acting similarly, I got a cup of soda in him to level him out. Took me 5 seconds to realize what the issue was, and save him from probably dying in a county drunk tank, since the store had called the cops already. Weird crap. As soon as I saw him, I had that same aha moment of, this is what you're here for. Now, was it the universe calling you to him, or was it him calling you to him to save him? That's a lot of hymns. But yes, something directed you there. Maybe his guardian angel. Case file number 2355, written by Ultra Mooney 87. Electrified, Ejected, and Enlightened. I had a legitimate near-death experience. Tunnel of light and the whole bit. I was electrically shocked from the back of a TV. The back of the old-style TV is a tube, and that tube is basically a huge capacitor that holds more volts than an electric chair. I miraculously survived, with only a heart arrhythmia. My grandpa, who worked for a local power company, told my mom later that I shouldn't be alive how I got shocked. In my near-death experience, I walked down the tunnel and there was a bright light. The light asked what I was doing there. I panicked because I'm like, frick, if you don't know, then how do I know? And then the light said I had a job to do and sent me back. The light faded, and where it faded, my mom came into view. She was a retired registered nurse, so she was trying to find a pulse or blood pressure. In her words, I was gone for a solid couple minutes. My heart just kind of kick-started again. It is comforting to know, though, wherever I was, it was peaceful, and it was alluded that it wasn't my ticket now, and I was going to be there someday. Like, no question. No, you need to fix this thing in your life. What also stood out to me is that my sexuality wasn't an issue. I'm bisexual, but at the time this all happened, I was 14 and still figuring things out. If it comforts anyone, it clearly was a total non-issue. Well, heaven, hell, God, religious, Christianity, and so on, is having a different orientation in that sense cosmic crime? I don't think so. It doesn't make sense to me, especially given it's just random, it's what you like. You don't typically choose it, or even if it's externally influenced. I mean, everything we are is externally influenced, so that doesn't really make sense to me. You're not harming anyone. Case file number 2356, written by Ejected. Dreams, Deadlines, and the Other Side. My best friend of my whole life, and my only friend for a good chunk of my life, died about a week before we found out my then-girlfriend was pregnant. I still hadn't graduated college due to a requirement that was overlooked by both myself and my counselor. I had started working full-time to help take care of my son before he was born, so my days were non-stop. Wake up at 4:30 a.m., get to work by 5:30, work until noon or so, drive back home to shower really quickly, leave for school, get to school, depending, about 40 minutes to an hour later, go to class, leave school around 9 p.m., go home, do whatever, homework and sleep. I did this for months, and one day I was hitting my limit. I was so tired. If I could only do one of these sets of things, then I would have so much more energy to hang out with my son, be a good boyfriend to my girlfriend, help out more around where we stayed. I worked Sunday through Thursday, and one Thursday, after I had come home and didn't have a class afterward, I was laying down with my son. I had homework due the next day, and I was about half done with it. I was laying there, eyes closed, no one in the room but my son and I. Then, a steady series of very hard and loud taps on my window woke me up from my quasi-sleep. Sometimes, when the neighbors were watering some plants, they would hit my window with it, and it sounded almost like that, but the window was dry. I thought maybe it was my father-in-law knocking on my window to say hi to the baby. I opened the door from my room to see everyone else who lives in the house in the living and dining room. I closed the door again. Right before the knocking, I said in my own head, "Hey V." My friend's full name was long, so I called him V. "I think I'm just gonna drop out." Once I realized there was no other cause I could figure out, I sighed, said, "Message received, bro," and grabbed out my homework. The other experience takes place about a month or so after my son was born, roughly 10 months after my brother's death. I'm still reeling from it, and I'm reeling from being a father. I was randomly out at a park near my house. It was obviously my son's first birthday. He was stumbling around being one, whatever. To my right, I hear my brother's voice. "Hey guys, sorry I'm late. Nipoti." Nipoti equals nephew in Italian. My head shot over to the sound, and there he was. I was so excited and shocked, I just went and tackled him straight to the ground, hugging him and crying. My mom, sister, and everyone else also came over to him. I was so happy he wasn't dead. He wasn't dead! Then it hit me. The sky had no color. Everything felt washed in the brush of a dream. I stopped, looked at him and went, "You died." Previously, he was laughing with everyone else. He tried ignoring me, like a dog that knows it's done something it shouldn't. "You died!" The rest of the party stopped. "You died, didn't you?" He looked away from me. Defeated, he said, "Yeah," and it hung in the air. My dream paused, almost as if you could hit a stopwatch to reality. With everyone else frozen, he hugged me and said, "I love you, man. Tell everyone else I love them too." He vanished, and I woke up crying. Oof, sorry for your loss, man. Case file number 2357, written by Edgar Pickle. The Call of the Wild magazine? A few years back, I moved up to northern Wisconsin for the summer. I had a good job, some friends already there, and it's beautiful during the summer. Anyway, one of my favorite things to do was simply get in the car and start driving. Any direction, it didn't matter. I just wanted to see the beauty of the land. And I was never disappointed. One day, I started driving again, randomly. But this time, I thought I ought to go south on Sanborn Avenue. It just felt like the thing to do. But really, that wasn't that unusual as I routinely took Sanborn. It's just that this time, I had a stronger feeling that I really ought to go that way. I drove on for a number of miles, until I came to the White River Dam. There's a little parking lot there for canoers and kayakers. I thought, I really want to park there. I really do. So I pulled the car over, got out, and looked around. I was overcome with this urge to walk around the edge of the lake above the dam. I realized that whatever it was that I'd been driving towards was there. By now, I'm totally perplexed and a little frightened of what I'm going towards. But I feel a push that is making me go forward, so I kept going. The edge of the lake isn't a hard line between solid land and water. There's a significant marshy area, and my feet started getting a little wet as I splashed through the water. But I knew I was close. Close to what, I wasn't sure, but I knew it was close. I came to a little bend in the trail I'd been following. Looking, I realized that whatever it was on the other side. Before I go on, I need to describe something about the feeling I was having. I don't know if I'm the only person who's had this or not, but I remember when I was younger and pretty inexperienced sexually, if there was a prospect of something significant happening with a girl, I would get a unique feeling of excitement and nervousness, combined with a feeling of doing something that might get me in trouble. I'm talking really inexperienced. Maybe it's just me that had that, maybe not, but that was the feeling I was having then. I was very obviously following something that was manipulating that part of my brain. I generally like that feeling when I get used to it, usually because it meant there was something good in the immediate future. But now, walking through a marsh after feeling like something was calling me there from miles away, well, as you can imagine, I was freaked out. But still, I thought I should at least see where this feeling was leading me. I went around the corner and thought, there it is. I looked, and there was a thick magazine on the ground. I leaned down and opened it up, and it was full of nothing but inappropriate material. Flipped through a page or two, then looked around for anything else, and that's when I realized that the feeling of being pushed was gone. In fact, all of the sensations I'd been having since I started driving were gone. It was just me standing in the Northwoods with a magazine full of inappropriate material. The magazine had been partially submerged in water and had mud on it, so I just left it there and drove home. I know this sounds like a joke story, but I swear this is something that happened to me. I'd never had that feeling of being pushed ever before, and I've never had it again. Well, harking back to the force that pushed the person to go save their long-lost friend or someone they knew at Whataburger. You never know where your gut is going to take you and the forces that permeate the universe. Now, was it important that you find this magazine and look at it? Briefly? Maybe. Sometimes the smallest domino can have the biggest impact. You just don't know, because the domino is miles back and you don't even remember it. Maybe sometime in the future it'll become apparent, but probably not. Case file number 2358, written by Division 23. The Skeptic and the Samurai. 15 years ago, I worked in a restaurant in a very old building that shared a yard with a courthouse, and was the site of a public gallows in the 19th century. The last public hanging was in 1834. When I started working there were some of the servers that told me that the place was haunted, and shared stories of strange things they experienced. Chairs and tables being moved when they left the room, those sorts of things. I was always a skeptic, so I never really took them too seriously. I had a key to the place and would be the first one there in the late morning, getting things ready by myself until early afternoon when everyone else would show up. The restaurant took up the entire 3 floors of the building, dining room and kitchen on the main floor, bar in the owner's office upstairs, and storage in the basement. I was in the kitchen one day. I'd gotten there just about an hour before and was the only one there. I heard a door close and someone walking around upstairs in the bar. Creaky old hardwood floors, real quiet when you're there by yourself, so it was obvious someone was moving around up there. The owner would sometimes sleep in his office if he had a late night, so I figured he must have spent the night and had just gotten up. I go upstairs and the place is empty. I look around the bar and office, call out the owner's name. Nothing. Silence. I've always been a skeptic, but I was so sure I had heard someone walking around up there. I go back to the kitchen, listening for any more sounds, and I don't hear any. I then hear what sounds like someone moving around downstairs, so I start to go down there. On the wall of the staircase is a huge oil painting, probably almost 2 meters square, with a really heavy steel frame. It's a painting of like a samurai warlord or something, sitting in a throne with a staff, and wearing a mask that looks like a skull, painted by the owner's grandfather, who had died in a house fire years before. As I am halfway down the stairs, I hear a snap, and this painting, which must weigh 40 to 50 pounds, comes flying right at my head, embedding a corner in the wall next to me, and I'm staring at the warlord guy right in the eyes. I freaking booked it up the stairs, out the front door, and waited for my coworkers to show up, so that I could tell them that I now am a believer in their ghost stories. Yeah, if a painting flies at my head with no discernible source from the Force, that'll make anyone believe. Case file number 2359, written by Kitty Queen Kayla. The last stop you should ever make. When I was a senior in high school, my dad drove me across state in New Mexico, USA, to check out a college I was thinking of going to. We were in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and we needed gas. We saw a small station and pulled into it. There was a note taped to the pump that said, "See cashier for payment." There was one car parked on the side of the building, and it didn't look like it had been there that long. No dust on it, tire marks in the dirt still visible, newish model, but we didn't see a single person. We walked up to the building, and the door was locked. You could see all the merchandise was still boxed up, and the shelves were empty. There was a door in the back that had a deep freezer pushed in front of it, as if someone was trying to keep something or someone from being able to open it. It was so quiet and eerie. I looked at my dad, and he looked at me, and we quickly got back into the car and got the hell out of there. To this day, I always wonder if someone was put in that back room and left to expire. Should we have called someone and reported it? Probably. I think about it all the time. Could I have saved someone's life if I had called? Were they already gone? Was anyone even there, or was it just an eerie coincidence that the freezer was positioned in that way? I don't know, but man, I do know that in that moment I felt actual fear, and I think my dad did too. A feeling of, you need to leave now, or something bad is going to happen. Maybe you should have called, but getting out is the correct move. Case file number 2360, written by Deep Garlic 2039. Sounds delicious. The Bermuda Pullover. Last summer, I took my family on a cruise to Bermuda. I remember packing and looking at the weather. I packed a bunch of shorts and tees, but also 2 pair of nice pants and some collared shirts, so my wife and I could go to a nice dinner one night while my parents watched our 3-year-old. This was not my first cruise, so I knew I may need a light jacket for a night on the deck. I packed my quarter-zip pullover. It's from a fundraiser golf outing my fraternity had. There's maybe 60 in existence that are exactly like it. I packed it specifically over any other pullover because I've been lucky to run into fraternity brothers from chapters all over the country who spot my letters. I figured why not on a cruise. We left Saturday afternoon from Manhattan. My wife and I picked Monday night to have our date, as it was the last night before we made it to Bermuda. And we wanted to make sure we didn't have reservations on other nights, in case we were enjoying Bermuda, and couldn't make it to the boat in time. It was cooler out that night, so after getting my nice pants and shirt on, I put on my pullover, before we left for dinner. We walked the ship a little, then decided to get our photos taken. I took my jacket off and placed it on a chair in the photo studio. My wife placed her clutch on top. When we were done, we grabbed our stuff and went to the restaurant. I put my jacket on the back of my chair, and we enjoyed our dinner. Once done, we headed back to our room, where my parents had just put our son to sleep. We had drinks we planned to enjoy on our balcony. This is when I realized I didn't have my jacket. I went back to the restaurant, which was closing, and asked if anyone turned the jacket in. I showed them a picture of it, and they said no, but to check the lost and found at guest services. I checked with guest services and they didn't have it either. I figured maybe it'll show up in a day or two. We went about our cruise. I checked back on Wednesday night and Friday before we packed up. We dug through all of our laundry and suitcases and it was simply gone. I also didn't have any other jackets, so it wasn't just like a mistake that I brought a different one. I also asked my parents and sister and her husband if they saw it, and the answer was again no. I was kinda pissed because I thought someone took this jacket that, unless they were in my fraternity, would mean nothing to them. We got home, unpacked, did our laundry. It was still nowhere to be found. About 4 months later, I was packing for a work trip and I knew I'd need a pullover. So when packing, I went to the area in our closet where I keep my pullovers, and there it was, hanging like it never left. I had talked to my wife as we just got back from a different beach trip, where I complained I didn't have my pullover, and here it was. I asked her if she saw it come back from the cruise, and she swore no. She would have said something, because she knew how upset I was. She also said she didn't see it go to the beach either, as at that point it was still gone. Case file number 2361, written by Anonymous. The Man Who Wore a Face. When I was in college, I was walking across campus to my early morning class, when this old white man with the bluest eyes I've ever seen stopped me to ask for bus ticket money. Everything went still around us. No sounds, the air felt stiff, and there was literally no one but us outside. This man's eyes were like aquamarine, but the rest of his face, it was like his skin was plastered on. His nose looked stuck on like clay. His cheeks looked like they were barely hanging on to whatever was underneath. He looked truly bizarre. He stops me and compliments my lipstick and asks if I could help him pay for a bus ticket so he could visit his son. I told him I didn't have cash to help him. He never breaks eye contact and tells me he's a veteran and takes his wallet out to show me his military lapel. When he opens it up, I see a wad of cash in there, and he looks at me again and asks if I could help. While all of this was happening, the only thing I felt was that I was in danger. I truly thought I was in the presence of someone evil, even though he didn't say or do anything to provoke the feeling. I ended up reaching in my bag for quarters and gave them to him. He held my hand for what felt like forever, and then let me go on my merry way. I think about this encounter a lot because it felt like he was pretending to be human. His skin looked like it was made out of wet clay and wrongly placed. His eyes were so blue they looked unnatural, supernatural. And why ask for money when you already had it? Anything to do with imposters does creep me out. Could it have been an alien trying to pose as human? But why would they be posing as a homeless man, a veteran down on his luck? I don't know. Case file number 2362, written by Ska Is Here. The name I didn't want to hear. Well, when I was 16, my family was temporarily staying at my aunt's house while we transitioned from out of state to the area. My aunt lived in an old family house that had been in our family for generations. The house was super old. Everything was made out of real wood and creaked like hell. Doors, windows, stairs, floors. It was summertime, and me being 16, I was up around 2 a.m. in the living room, chilling by myself on my laptop. All the lights were out because I didn't want to disturb anyone else in the house. The house had the basic main floor, upstairs, and basement. It was also an old row house in DC, so you could just turn your head in either direction and see the entirety of the house. So it wasn't the largest of spaces. Well, anyway, I'm chilling, hanging out, super attentive to whatever the hell I was looking at on my computer. I was laying on my tummy with my head in the direction of the front door and stairwell that led upstairs. Then, out of nowhere, I hear someone say my name from right behind me. I mean, right behind me. As if someone was standing or sitting right behind me. The voice was crystal clear, not a muffle or anything. It sounded like a man's voice, although there were no men in the house. I also have an extremely unique name that isn't easily confused with other words. Instantly, I smiled, thinking it was one of my sisters or cousins playing a prank on me. I whipped my head around to catch whoever thought they were funny, and there was absolutely no one there. As I began to think of how someone could be pranking me, the humorous feeling I had quickly faded to terribly petrified. I realized I was the only one on the main floor. Everyone else was either upstairs in the bedrooms, or my mom was sleeping in the basement turned temporary room. I began thinking that the proximity the voice came from, literally right behind me, was too close for someone to sneak up behind me to not hear them approaching. Literally everything in this house creaked loud as hell. Literally impossible for someone to even tiptoe around without being heard. Before this moment, I was facing the staircase, so if anyone came downstairs from one of the upstairs bedrooms, I would have seen them, Within a matter of seconds, I hopped up and went off to the basement to join my mom as she slept. One of the most horrifying moments of my life. Never experienced anything remotely similar since, thank God. Case file number 2363, written by Scroforius. Boom, boom, run. I used to teach in the evenings in Japan about 5 years ago. I often met students at different temples and shrines because people often use the rooms there as community spaces for things like that. It was around 11:30 p.m. I had just had my last English lesson with a student. After she left, it was my job to vacuum the room I had used and turn off all the lights. So I went into the room with the vacuum, and there were dozens of decorated drums and portable shrines I had never seen before that were being stored there, as a festival was coming up. I opened the door and could see them moving a little, but I figured it was from vibrations from me opening the sliding door and went about my business. I usually try not to think about creepy things and just ignore if something like this happens. Anyway, I turned off all the lights before bringing back the vacuum, except the last one by the entrance. Then went to the storage room again to put the vacuum back. As I opened the door to the storage room, the big drum started booming in rhythm, super loud. And the portable shrines were all making noise too, with the little drums on them. My senses became overwhelmed, and I was afraid to look. I fled from the building and ran to my car, only to remember I hadn't locked up. I didn't want to be fired, so I had to call my husband and was on speakerphone with him the entire time that I ran back to the temple, and locked the door with shaking fingers, and I could still hear the drums from outside. Luckily, I made it out alright. But I feel like something was messing with me. Since then, people ask me if I ever saw any ghosts at the temples, because in Japan they believe ghosts come out at temples at night. But I never told them about that and just said no. I'm pretty sure it wasn't an earthquake or something that caused it, because the drums were making a noise as if someone was hitting them rather than just rattling. And also, I didn't feel an earthquake, and also it continued longer than an earthquake, way longer than you can feel would normally last. I also felt like it was specifically related to me opening the door and coming into the room. Like the first few rattles were a warning, but it got real when I went back in. It's a ghost that wanted to sleep, but made a ruckus so you'd leave. Case file number 2364, written by Filthy the Dog. Luminous Logic. Sometime back in the early 90s, my then-girlfriend and I lived in a Victorian terraced house. Nothing overtly spooky ever occurred there, apart from the neighbors complaining that someone had been in their house and moved things around when they were away. They were alarmed enough to call the police, and seeing as there was a shared roof space along the terrace, we were briefly questioned, as were the other neighbors. Weirdly, the police asked if there had been any paranormal activity in either of our houses, which was obviously laughed off. At the time. A few months later, my girlfriend and I were lying in bed with the lights out. I was on my back with my eyes open. Slowly, a luminescent, hollow ball faded into view, seemingly made up of lots of very small, dim, fluorescent rods, like the magnified pictures of bacteria you see. The ball was about 1 meter across and was perhaps 1.5 meters above the middle of the bed. I was obviously having some pre-sleep hallucination. After a few seconds, it faded, and I turned to my girlfriend and said, "I just saw a ball of small lights floating over the bed." She had seen it too. We lay there, shocked. Soon, another hollow ball appeared, this time made up of dim, fluorescent triangles. Again, this lasted a few seconds, then faded away. I think after that, our eyes were tightly shut, and heads went under the duvet, but the experience was never repeated, as far as either of us saw. I once told the story to somebody, and they wondered what would have happened if we'd reached up to the strange objects and touched them. You know, that's a good question. Would you be consumed by the energy, or would it transfer into you? Case file number 2365, written by Aquila Odax, The Phantom and the Foreigner. I used to live in an apartment opposite a park in Japan. On the other side of the park was a convenience store. and the quickest way to the store was directly through the park. The park was pretty bare, had a baseball field, a playground, and a path leading through it, with some mounds, some small plants, and thin trees. One summer evening, I'm headed to the store to get some cigarettes, and I notice a lady standing to the side of the path just staring at some houses. I get closer, and I greet her with a "good evening" in Japanese. She doesn't say anything back, but I think nothing of it, as she's probably afraid of a foreign man alone in the park at night. She's about 5 meters off the path, just standing still there. I look at her as I pass by, and she has this distressed look on her face, still intently staring at the houses across the street. I didn't really know what to do. I looked at the houses, then back to her, then decided to just mind my own business and push on. I took about 5 or 10 more steps, then came to a halt. Something wasn't right. Everything about her just seemed off. I turned around and she was gone. There were no trees thick enough to hide behind, no bushes or large rocks to hide behind, no buildings, no bins. Had she ran, there wasn't enough time to be out of my sight. I also would have heard her running on a gravel and dirt path. She vanished in the space of seconds. I walked around for a few minutes looking for her, thinking it was a prank, but she was nowhere to be found. The whole atmosphere of that park changed for a moment. The air felt heavy, and I felt like I was being watched. I pressed on to the store, and I took the long route home. About 3 months later, I was smoking on my balcony one night, when I saw her again. The same part of the park, same stance, staring at the same house. And again she disappeared in an instant when I took my eyes off her. Well, if I had to guess, something happened in the house she's staring at, something very traumatic, and she can't move on. Case file number 2366, written by It's Just Me 134582. 4 legs, 2 human. I was living on a farm that had pigs, chickens, and cats and dogs. The pigs had a pen that was about 25 by 30, and it was built from wire and planks. The planks they would regularly rub up against and make loud noises with. The wire they would scrape against the wood and make loud noise. The pigs would snort and splash in mud. In short, it was always loud there. I was walking around after a long day of work with my older brother and Ma. It was about 10:30, middle of December, so it was cold and the sun was down. And I heard a loud noise, similar to one of the pigs screaming, come out of the valley that the pig's pen was located in. I ignored it, because as stated earlier, it was always loud there. But after about 3 minutes of the non-stop screaming of the pigs, I decided that something was wrong, and I needed to check it out. So I dreadfully trudged downwards into the valley on the worn path, and lo and behold, nothing was wrong. At least, that was what I thought. See, our Ma had given us headlamps that were required to wear when we were outside after 9. We lived in Kentucky, specifically a part that lived up to the name Coyote Country, so you can understand why she required it. After I turned on my lamp, I immediately saw what their squealing was for. Before me stood a creature. It stood on all 4s, but it looked weirdly humanoid. It couldn't be human though, because its arms were too long. It had a snout and wolf's ears. Its mouth was covered in blood. Its teeth were razor sharp, and its eyes reflected an eerie white against my headlamp. It was covered in fur and abnormally tall for a coyote or even a bobcat. Before it sat the carcass of a pig. I won't go into the gruesome details of what had been done to it, but imagine a butcher shop, but only if the animals were still alive and squealing around. I screamed, yes, literally screamed, and ran away in terror, tripping along the way because I wore cowboy boots back then, the kind with heels. I ran all the way back to the cabin, which was 4 acres away, and explained what had happened to my brother and Ma. My brother didn't believe me, but my Ma was concerned and sent him out to check. He came back saying that the pen was broken and that one of the pigs were missing. When I went to check, it was true. Of course, there was a blood spot where the carcass had been, but the creature was gone. All the piglets were huddled in a corner together, refusing to leave. So we spent 2 hours fixing the pen, Then we went back and everyone laid down. It has been a long time since then, and I still don't know what I saw. For a while I thought I was insane, but now I know it happened. I believe in the supernatural. We moved soon after that. I don't know if this has to be supernatural. I think it's simply the fact that the world is so big. There are probably creatures, maybe on the brink of extinction, that we simply haven't discovered. And what you saw, what you described kind of sounds like a werewolf, but maybe something like a werewolf does exist. Not in the sense of humans transforming into it, but some kind of creature that is bloodthirsty. Now time for the jokes of the day. The president needs to put deodorant on. He has a lingering musk. Whatever you think of Elon Musk, I actually think he's pretty cool. But yeah, he's definitely entwined with the presidency right now. My girlfriend told me she wanted to see a diamond on our anniversary. So I took her to a baseball game. I got thrown out of my local park after arranging the squirrels by height. They didn't like me criticizing. Once upon a time, there was a king that was only 12 inches tall. He was a terrible king, but he made a great ruler. Did you know a bowling alley is the quietest place in the world? You can hear a pin drop. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. Kinetic Symphony signing off.